起立，面向参加一鞠
Now
躬，
once,
再鞠躬，
twice, about the third time.
参加21鞠躬，
Now once,
开班鞠
now
躬，
once. Please have a seat.
请坐下。Bill, time for me to mute my microphone.
Thank you, sir, and good morning. It is a beautiful sunny day in Indianapolis, nice and warm outside, a little bit of a breeze blowing. It is a beautiful day to be sharing the processes of cultivating the Tao teachings and trying to learn how to apply those in our lives. It's just a great day for this. I say that pretty much every week, and every week I mean it. It's always a good day to be part of the Tao teachings and part of this effort that we have going on here. We got a lot of people signed on this morning. That's a wonderful thing. I just am continually amazed at how well this little venture is taken off and how well it does. And hopefully it'll continue to do that for a very long time. This morning, I'm speaking actually to another special request on love and relationships. And this is another one of those topics that's actually near and dear to my heart as well. Our interpersonal relationships are one of the most important things that we as human beings ever engage in. And they have a huge bearing, actually, on how we feel about ourselves and how we place ourselves in society and see ourselves from a self-esteem and image perspective, perhaps. There isn't anywhere we go or anything that we do that does not involve some form of interaction with other people. And so this is, once again, a huge topic of Tao cultivation and Tao study. However, the philosophical points for this morning's talk come from the doctrine of Confucius. As it turns out, he had some very specific things to say about interpersonal relationships and about the management of interpersonal relationships and the natural order of interpersonal relationships, some of which we'll agree with, some of which we won't. But time changes everything. Initially, according to Confucius, there were 5 fundamental or basic relationships. The relationship between a ruler and a subject, between a father and son, between an older brother and a younger brother, between husband and wife, and friend to friend. And interestingly enough, those 5 basic relationships are still very much in existence today. Those 5 relationships still pretty much define the majority of the interpersonal interactions that we find ourselves in. They fall into one of those categories, and certain followers of other traditions may find that they have relationships with husband and wives. I'm not quite sure how that works. I've only ever been able to manage one, but whatever works for them. As it is, we're going to find that these 5 relationships speak volumes to our other relationships. Primarily, first of all, because they establish a structure for authority and interaction between people. For instance, a subject is, in many ways, obligated to carry out the orders of the ruler. There are varying degrees of severity in motivating a person to do that. But essentially, when the ruler says something has to get done, it is an obligation of the subjects to behave accordingly, to pay obeisance and respect to the ruler. Between the father and the son, particularly when children are very young, The parents have to be responsible for essentially everything that the youngster encounters and does, assuming that we want our children to survive. It's incumbent upon the parent to make sure that his young son doesn't reach up and grab the hot stove or pour a pan of boiling water on himself or get hurt or injured in some other way. Later in life, it is the obligation of the son to pay obeisance and respect to the father. And in Confucius' mind at the time this was written, that had a tremendous impact on the reputation of both the father and the son. It said that the father had constructed such a relationship with his son that his son still had respect for his father and a willingness to obey his father. And for those of you with children, as I have, particularly teenage children, you may very well understand how difficult at times it can be to create that relationship with one of the children. After that, there is the relationship from older to younger brother. Now, once again, there's an authority relationship here in that the younger brother is supposed to pay obeisance and respect to the older brother. I'm not sure that that necessarily occurs so much these days in at least Western society. But once again, when children are smaller, when there's a significant age difference between an older brother and a younger brother, the younger brother very typically sees the older brother as one who can do no wrong, one whose example they will emulate no matter what. And their reasoning very, very often for acting is because their older brother did this or did that or showed them how to do this or that. Of all of the relationships, perhaps the relationship between a husband and wife is the most fascinating to study and the most interesting to maintain. It's an unfortunate reality in Western society that all too often marriages are things as seen as things of convenience and relationships of impermanence and transience, and that when one partner or the other gets tired of the relationship or one partner or the other finds that they've made an unwise choice, instead of finding a way to preserve the family and the relationship, it simply is ended. I'm not here to judge that or to comment on it, but in my own life, having made my own relationship mistakes in the past, I'm in this marriage to make it last until I die. I've told my wife repeatedly that if she ever leaves me, that was it. I'm done. No more. And she feels very much the same way. More on that later. The final relationship is the only one of significant difference in that there's not a straightforward authority relationship defined here, and that's in the friend-to-friend relationship. Okay? So these basic relationship categories kind of define broadly the types of relationships that we find ourselves in. The basic relationships, as we've seen, also set expectations for the interaction between the parties in the relationship. That is to say that each person with authority is given the authority over the other, but also there's a more or less tacit expectation buried within these teachings that says that the person with authority is admonished to use loving compassion in their relationship with others. And that is, the ruler is not to lord his power over the subjects, and to do so is to put himself in a dangerously untenable position. That a father is not to abuse his power and authority over his son, or he creates a rebellious and contrary son. That the older sibling shouldn't bully and lord his power over the younger sibling for the very same reason, because the younger sibling may at some point in time rebel against that excessive force and turn that around on his brother at some point. Obviously, between a husband and wife, for one partner or the other to say that they have absolute authority over the other is to instantaneously create an environment of derision and separation, of tension and ill will. And between friend to friend, if one of the people involved in that relationship believes themselves to be in a position of power over the other, the friendship cannot be expected to last for long. And so, yes, there is the discussion of authority. There's the discussion of obeisance and respect, but also there is the admonition for the application of wisdom, kindness, and compassion. So is this stuff just all ancient teachings? Are these the musings of an old Chinese guy that don't really hold any relevance today? I get asked that from time to time. I think the answer to that question probably is fairly self-evident, but for the sake of my talk, we'll go ahead and say that yes, they're relevant, and they are. And if we stop and think for a moment, we're all subjects of our government. Our government is made up of people, right? If you don't believe me, run a red light sometime, or blow through a stop sign, or go 20 miles over the speed limit. That law enforcement officer that pulls you over to give you that ticket is a person. And that person has feelings and emotional states. That person may be having a great day or a bad day. You don't know which. And how we interact with that person may very well dictate whether we receive a warning and a stern talking to, or an opportunity to go spend $300 on something we didn't really want to spend $300 on, or more or less. Right? Of the people gathered here in this group this morning or this evening, whatever time zone you're in, many of us are married or in a committed relationship of one kind or another with another person. And therefore, the teachings on the husband and wife relationship, the partnership relationship in a marriage or committed relationship become extremely relevant. And the wisdom and knowledge of how those people should interact one with the other in order to maintain harmony and equilibrium are important. They help us, once again, to smooth out the rough spots, the rough edges in those relationships, and make them stronger and better and easier to maintain. Many of us are parents. We have children. Some of them very young, some of them teenagers, some of them grown. I happen to have at least one in each one of those categories. Okay? And the interactions with all of those children are somewhat different depending on age and gender and interest and what have you. But the relationships are still there. And many of us, very many of us, have brothers and sisters. You know, the relationships that we share with our siblings is perhaps one of the most special relationships there is. I have two sisters that are younger than I am and a younger brother. My sisters and I were never close, but my little brother and I were, and I was able on a few occasions to provide him some pretty substantial assistance with his life to help kind of get him moving in the right direction. And likewise, you know, there have been times where he's helped me, and so we're kind of in that every person is each other's student and teacher loop. But between he and I, it doesn't feel that way. It simply feels like one brother helping another. And hopefully all of us have some friends. If I'm speaking to anyone right now who doesn't have any friends, I kind of doubt that was a choice, and hopefully we can do a little something about that. Furthermore, some of us are in positions of authority, perhaps in a business setting or a government setting where we have people that work for us or report to us in some way or another. And we're all subject to some authority. We all have a boss somewhere. We all work for somebody, unless we own our own businesses. And then, of course, we have the IRS and the other taxing authorities and various and sundry regulatory agencies that we're subject to. And even if all of the other relationships and all of the other things that I've just said are not true for someone, we all still inhabit this earth. We all are going to interact with somebody at some time. And how we interact with each other in the home and in our communities and in our towns and villages, and ultimately how we interact with those who spread our interactions throughout the earth are important. It's very easy to think that no one person can have a global impact, that our words, our thoughts, and our actions are localized to our homes and perhaps our neighborhoods. But these days, with the advent of the internet, with the ability to present information such as this study group and written publication, and the ease with which that information can be disseminated and retrieved, anybody can speak and have global impact. So perhaps as we think about our interactions with those we know, it might be wise also to consider our interactions with those we do not know. And so if we try to extend Confucius' teachings from the very old to the more contemporary, what can we really say? Well, for one thing, compassion and kindness never go out of style. Confucius was not an autocrat. He wasn't an authoritarian. Perhaps with a little poetic license for interpretation, one might say that Confucius was a student of society, a student of the functioning of people within a societal structure, one who sought to understand human interaction and relationships, and then to hope to improve them by applying what he knew of the Tao teachings and what he knew of human nature. And so within the teachings of the relationships and the authority structure, once again, there's the knowledge that the authority has to be tempered with understanding and with compassion. In speaking about the relationship between parents and children, the father-son relationship, Confucius actually goes on quite a bit about the example that the son sets being a reflection upon the father, and that good example is something that builds the esteem and the reputation of the family. Essentially, one can derive from that a good example there is worth 1,000 words or more. If the father was insightful enough and compassionate enough and understanding enough to build that trusting, loving, almost soul level connection with his son, that caused for his son to bring honor to the family and to his father, that was a big deal. To one degree or another, it's still a big deal. The children, irrespective of whether they're male or female, are a reflection of both the parents' knowledge and understanding and of their mistakes. It's true that all of these children grow up at some point in time to be their own discrete, independent, self-thinking people with their own personalities and choices. But in their core, in their essential nature, in their pre-learning mind, there is the essence of what they were taught by their parents between about birth and 6 years of age. And that core that essential set of values and beliefs never leaves a child past the age of 6, about. And so, irregardless of what perhaps our teenagers do in the effort to find and explore themselves and to figure out the nature of their relationships, at some time they will return to that core set of values and beliefs, and those things will guide their lives. If those things are good and beneficial and they lead that child to a good and beneficial and upright existence in society, then the reflection on the parents is a positive one. If it leads them down a different path, perhaps that reflection is not so positive. And in point of fact, our very own society is a reflection of the people within it. You know, as far back as Aeschylus, the ancient Greek philosopher, people have bemoaned and decried the younger generation. I remember last year sometime, maybe a little earlier, Frank Weigel sent me a really neat quote from one of the Stoic philosophers talking about the younger generation and how irresponsible they were and how headstrong they were and how deviant they were, and how he wasn't sure that the world could exist once it was in the hands of these youngsters. And I was surprised to find out from Frank later that was written by an ancient philosopher, because we say the very same things today. But knowing that, it kind of, once it got done halting my brain, gave me a somewhat different perspective, even on the behavior of my own children, to realize that most of them are going to be okay. I did things as a teenager that I'm not particularly proud of, and some of them I did just to simply find out who I was and what I was and where I was. But when it comes right down to it, as an adult, I do my thing every day. I go to work. I do the very best I can to provide for my wife and my family. And, most nights I go to bed with very little weight on my shoulders. I feel pretty good about what I've done and how I've done it. And so perhaps there's hope for society yet. Then we come down to the husband-wife relationship, the love relationships, the intimate relationships, the ones that cause us the most trouble. Why? Well, it's simple. When we think we've fallen in love with somebody, we become much more vulnerable. We put our emotions right out there on the old sleeve. We almost, without thinking, grant somebody else the ability to cause us tremendous joy and tremendous pain at the same time. And yet, without that vulnerability, without that exposure, we never can understand what it means to be connected to somebody, body, mind, and soul. In the New Testament, it says when a man and woman are married, that they leave their parents' home and they come together and they become one flesh. And that's not just in reference to sex. It is a union of that couple at every level that's possible. And relationships at that level will require a certain amount of effort and work to maintain. Okay? It's not something that you jump into and then wake up 50 years later and find out that everything was fine. If you're not aware of what's going on day by day, chances are your relationship isn't going 50 years. What many people believe is love actually is infatuation. It's a transient emotional state. It's driven by our ego, our desires, and a lot of dopamine. It's a hormone that triggers a pleasure receptor in the brain. We think that we cannot live without that person. that if they don't acknowledge us and want to spend the rest of their lives with us, that we'll just certainly die. And that's not usually the truth. Real love, the love that sustains a 50-year marriage, is it's the outcome of putting another person before ourselves every single day of our lives, and choosing to continue to do that through the good times and the not so good times. It means understanding that partner that you're hanging out with for the remainder of your days is as human as you are. And sometimes they're going to do well, and sometimes they're not going to do well. Sometimes they're going to prop you up, and sometimes they're going to let you down. It's just part of being human. The $64 question is, are you prepared to accept that person as the human being they are? And then work with them to get through those situations that are perhaps less positive than you wanted, and share the joy with them through the good ones. I have to be sure and wind up on time today, so I've shortened this a bit more than I really wanted to, but it's okay. While we're thinking about this, understand that 4 of the 5 basic relationship types deal with one person having authority over another, and that the expectation that person that has the authority will use that power wisely and sparingly. The 5th relationship category, the friend-to-friend relationship, is a co-equal relationship that succeeds not because of power and authority, but because of a mutual choice. Both people decide they want to be there and stay there for as long as they do. And so perhaps when we interact with those that we care for, the husband and wife, the father to son, the brother to brother, maybe it might help us a bit to treat them more as friends than subjects. The other thing that I thought about while I was writing this is that, with so many other facets of Tao cultivation, and perhaps more so with this than others, relationships are subject to the very same attachment and desires that cause us trouble in other areas of our lives. But in our relationships, those attachments and desires are so close to our emotional selves, to our view of ourselves as worthwhile people, that when things don't go our way, very often we're left feeling empty and crushed and put down. And so we need to learn that when we form an attachment to someone or something, it becomes really easy to see that other person as being responsible for either our happiness or our misery, and neither of those things is the truth. We are responsible for our own happiness and our own misery. We choose how we will react. And when we allow our desires to become excessive, we always invite trouble into our lives. If we're out stalking that really good-looking secretary because we just feel like she's got to go out with us or we'll die, and I know there are guys sitting around here smiling right now, that's an obsessive desire. It's a desire that may or may not ever be met. And it's a desire just like other extreme desires that can cause us a great deal of trouble. So I'm going to wrap it up here real quick by saying that our relationships can either be a source of great joy or great suffering, depending on our choices and the choices of the other people involved. We can't force another person to become who or what we want them to be. We can't change their essential nature. We can't change how they are or how they think or what they do. If we're not prepared to accept them the way they are, then perhaps we need to move along or adjust our thinking somewhat. And kindness and compassion and understanding and wisdom and hard work are the absolute keys to relationship success. And that's any relationship. Anything that we want to have endure for any amount of time, we have to pay attention to, we have to take care of, we have to maintain. If we don't, then it won't last. It can't last. And lastly, it is absolutely never too late to improve ourselves and our relationships. Those are things that we can do every day. We can choose to make those things better. Thank you all very much, and I hope something I said was helpful for someone. Thank you.